Welcome back to the Dungeon Master's Block, the place where we come to talk about the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game. With every conversation, we hope to inspire as many as possible to keep on Dungeon Mastering.
I'm one of your hosts, DM Chris.
And I'm DM Mitch.
And I'm one of your hosts, DM Derek, aka How Not to DM.
And I'm your other host, DM Neal, aka Jote Maniac. Listeners, if you've listened to anything recently, you'll know we've been hinting at it, but we have reached our diamond milestone. I looked it up, and the traditional gift for 10 years of marriage, good enough, is diamond. So the Dungeon Master's Block has officially hit diamond, and it has been 10 years that the podcast has been going.
So when does Podbean give us our diamond status credit card and stuff, you know?
We gotta be close. I'll message them. I'm sure it will be fine, and that's exactly what they will do.
Yeah, for sure. Diamond, that's good. I didn't get you a gift, Neal. I feel bad. I should have gotten you some diamond dice, I suppose. That would be quite expensive, but you know, it only feels right.
I would settle for mammoth bone.
That would be pretty sweet.
That used to be an option. I don't know if it's still an option, but there used to be mammoth bone dice.
I mean, meteor dice, mammoth bone dice, anything made out of like something weird or ancient, I could get behind. Yeah, but
so what we thought we would do is we would jump back in. I realized in the previous two mailbags, I named them after Fast and the Furious jokes. So this is none other than Mailbag X, because that's the 10th movie, which is kind of the 12th movie because you had Hobbs and Shaw. We don't have to talk about that.
Where The Rock holds a helicopter down.
Yeah.
With pure willpower.
Or there's the other one where they're in the ice and he leans out and then moves where the missile is going. Or when they send the Ford Fiesta into space. Or literally anytime it crashes and everyone's
Isn't this
fine.
just the fifth mailbag? So isn't it just Mail 5 or
Listen,
Mailbag 5?
Listen, if we're doing Fast and the Furious things, we don't have to follow rules. We just have to follow family. It is, but also those other mailbags were literally it was literally Mailbag and Mailbag 02, and then I didn't realize that, and I think I put just Mailbag of Holding, and then I put 2 Mailbag 2 Furious for the last one. So I thought about, we talked about Mailbag, Tal'Dorei Drift.
Yeah, it would have to be Tal'Dorei Drift if this is the third one.
Okay, we'll see. Who knows, listener? You know. But today we're going to do a mailbag episode. But not only that, we're going to throw back to the earliest of mailbags so we can kind of do a retrospective, not only on the podcast, but what were people asking 10 years ago when 5th edition just came out. As we stare down the upcoming release of the newer edition, as I am wont to call it, we can look at some questions. So we'll go back and forth between new questions and old questions, and eventually we will run out until the next mailbag.
Might as well. All right, well, let's kick it off then.
I'm starving. We ain't had nothing but maggoty bread for 3 stinking days.
Why can't we have some meats?
The flattened meat's back on the menu, boys!
So let's just jump right in. Our first email that we're going to be looking at today is from Philip Mainprize, and he writes to us a bunch of questions and just is basically telling us all of the ideas of what he's going through as he builds races in his world. His email was entitled, Races! So we've already responded to him, but there's some really good stuff in this email. We wanted to bring it to this episode to kind of talk about so we can all benefit from it. Yeah. So one of the first questions that he brings up when he talks about races is, I like the standard fantasy stuff. I am considering removing Tiefling / Demonkin and Half-Orc as a playable options as a race. They just don't fit with the way my fantasy world works. Is that okay? How should I handle players who want to play those races? So he said later after the conversation that at the very least half-orcs and orcs, they exist in his world. Yeah. It's not that they don't exist.
If it doesn't fit, don't try and make it fit just because your players want to. And now I misunderstood this email the first time we got it. I thought he was talking about there aren't going to be orcs or tieflings at all. Like they just weren't going to be there. And that's not the case with what he was talking about. He's just simply saying, yeah, I don't want them to be playable characters. And like I said in the first emails, I said, they're staples like in any fantasy world at this point in time. It's going to be hard for people to kind of cope with the fact that if you don't have orcs there, there's no orcs. And I think the fact that they're still there, that's a little bit easier for people to cope with. I don't think people will feel so bad about not being able to play as orcs. But I think if you took them out altogether, that would be a little bit more difficult, I would think. I mean, do you think that would be a little bit more difficult to handle if you took them out altogether?
I think maybe for the certain player. I think that's a very individualistic problem. Really, it's like when you make your own world, if that's something that you don't want in your world, it's your world and you should make it the way you want to make it. I have done very, very little work besides kind of start a map for it. But I've already started a world beyond Atos that in that world, I'm like, all right, Atos is Atos. If I'm going to make a new world, I want it to be super different.
Yeah.
And so the races are way different. And there aren't any orcs. There's a race that are kind of like the Kunari from the Dragon Age series. I would say it's totally okay either way. If it's something that you just don't want orcs, or if you don't want your players to be orcs, that's something that's okay because you're the one building the world. And you shouldn't let your creative juices be stopped by, but I want the strength bonus of the orc. Like, that should not be it. Now, like, I think you make a good point with what if, like, and that's, I think, one of his worries when he asks, what do I do with a player who wanted to play like a half orc, wanted that bonus. And what we told Philip Mainprize is that he really shouldn't even have that problem because he's doing a lot of work, and we'll continue on with this email and tell you about it, but he's doing a lot of work on homebrewing different kinds of races and stuff. So he's giving them plenty more options. But I think that is the point. Like, if you have a player who's really set and really wants to play an orc, or whatever race it is in your world that you don't want them to be able to have as a playable race, I think the first step would be talk to that player and figure out, why do you want to be an orc? Or whatever it is.
Right.
I'm thinking, what would be a reason that somebody would want to play an orc? I want to be really strong. And giving them other options and maybe helping them instead of just being like, nope, can't be an orc. Like, pick something else. Like, trying to lead them in a direction and using what they want in that orc kind of character and trying to lead them in maybe like, well, maybe you'd like to play this race. Or maybe like this is like along the lines of what you're doing. Play a big, strong human.
And we'll talk about this a little bit later in the podcast in more depth. But you can also, when you start a campaign, you can give specific parameters as far as what you can play that campaign to. And it might be one of those things that if you give them only specific ones that they can play, it's almost like out of sight, out of mind. Maybe if you don't have the option, it's kind of just like, oh, not really there. I'm not really focusing on it at all. Maybe I'll play something different. So. It may be something that you have to deal a lot with, and maybe something that you have to deal very little with, depending on who your players are. Next part of his email that he went on to say after the orc and tiefling was he was talking to us a little bit more about how he wanted to add anthropomorphic creatures into his campaign. And just to list a few of them, we're not going to get into all the nitty-gritty details about what he said that each class was proficient in and everything like that. We're just going to list them off and share what we think a little bit more about anthropomorphic creatures and how we've used them in the past. And so he's got like deer folk is one, bison folk, squirrel folk, bear folk, fox folk, canine folk, and rhino folk were the ones that he was specifically focusing on. And personally, I like the idea of having anthropomorphic creatures. Mitch, I know you've added a few into your last campaign.
In my world.
Yeah. And I have probably about 9 right now that I've made. You guys haven't seen any of them yet in my campaign, but I've added about 9 of them. And I really like the fact of having anthropomorphic creatures because I think when you add them in, it's kind of like that little bit of, that's so cool that, there's a deer walking around that's actually talking. And it's not just simply, grazing out in the pasture or whatever, out in the forest, eating something. You see a big old bison. I know you played a bison folk in my campaign before he tragically got burnt to a crisp by a dragon. Yeah. But it was pretty cool to see some of those anthropomorphic creatures walking around, and it adds kind of a touch of flair to a campaign a little bit.
And when we talk about these creatures, they're not like it's not just a deer walking around that talks. Like, it's not
Right.
Narnia that we're
Right.
talking about.
Right.
Although, if that's what you want to take as an idea, go for it. But these are a mix between, if they're humanoid animals.
They
such
have
as
intelligence.
if a deerkin would stand up on its two legs and probably have some sort of hands instead of hooves to be able to grasp weapons, but be covered completely in fur and have a deer's head and that kind of thing. One of the things I wrote to Philip about that I love about this when I'm creating these for my world is having their societies, their cultures be based off of the creature in the real world that we are in today. So like in my world, the anthropomorphic bears, the bearkin, quote unquote, are known as the Bjorns or the Ursas, and they will hibernate for the winter. Like, they'll just go to sleep for like 3 months. And then the Lupins in my world, which are wolves, they are very pack-like. And so you can take aspects of the real creature and put them into your world, and that's the way their culture, their society is. And it makes a very distinct people group, and I really, really like that idea.
Yeah, instead of simply just having, it's like, there's a bear walking around, we don't know much about his culture or anything like that. It's like, that makes good sense to me. To say, yeah, this bear likes to sleep a lot, or, you know, if it doesn't completely hibernate, it sleeps for much longer periods throughout the day, at least, you know. During the winter months, it sleeps for 15 hours instead of the regular 8 or something like that.
Hashtag Magic Mark is playing a Lapid in my current campaign, which is a rabbit folk, and he is constantly, he's very curious, he's looking for the next new shiny thing and jumping around, and he's very energetic. And and then you go along with, if you're going to make homebrew classes for these, having the stats of those creatures be what those creatures are and reflect what those creatures are, such as the Lapid race they can use Expeditious Retreat once per day, and if you make a Rhino King or a Rox, having them have their horn be a natural weapon and getting feats on like maybe they already get the charging feats already
something
within their race.
It's just instilled in them.
I really like anthropomorphic animals and races in my world. In my world, it's kind of the east side of the world has a lot, and that's kind of their side, the beast folk on that side, and then the western world is very human focused and two very different separate worlds. Are yours kind of all mixed in, or is
mine are more mixed in right now? I have one right now that's pretty cool that I'm working on. It's a chameleon folk. I don't know if I told you about that at all, but it has a special ability that once a day, depending on what its level is, it can change shape. So like once per day per level. So you add like your level 5, you can change for 5 hours per day into whatever creature that you want or need to change into at that point in time. And I might change it so that it's only a half hour per level, because once you get up to like 10th level, it's like, oh, you can change into whatever you want for 10 hours. It's like, that might be a little bit long, a little bit broken. But so I might change it to like, you can change into a half hour per level into whatever you want as a chameleon folk. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm excited. I think it's going to be in my next campaign as a playable character. So something to think about, Mitch. For you to play as. So
the last thing we have to talk about with this is DM Main Prize had a sweet idea. He said he might do a campaign where all of his players choose beast folk or beast kin or animal kin or whatever you want to call them. And what happens is it'd be early on in his world's history. And I think he said that they would basically, that race would die off. So say there was like, they would play a buffalo kin and a lion kin and everything like that. They die off, that race. But those races end up being gods of a future people
society.
Kind of, he said, kind of like Egyptian gods, like they were all very animal based. And the players in that campaign would end up being those gods.
And I think what he was said too earlier in the email was that the things that happen in that campaign would shape the stories of what we're told for like the sacred texts and stuff like that, other people, which I think is that's really cool idea.
We've talked about like having your players' characters shape the world that you've created. Not, that gives them this great feeling and this great interest in what's going to happen in your world, and they become more interested and more drawn into your stories and your world. And I think that's a really great idea of how to do that.
I think if you keep that type of thing, like, so that your players don't know that they're going to turn into gods later.
Yeah,
I think that would be really cool for them to see,
the big
like,
reveal.
The big reveal, like a campaign later or 2 campaigns later, where you run into somebody. It's like, why am I worshiping this bear folk that's no longer here in this world? But that looks oddly familiar, like my character back in the day. And then it's finally like, oh my gosh, that is so cool. And they're telling stories around fires of, like, you know, this is who this bear folk slew in battle or something like that. And it's part of the sacred text, and they have, you know, chants. I think that'd be super cool.
Yeah, or even you end that campaign with a kind of epilogue thing where you say, all right, well, all your characters are dead, but it doesn't have to be long. It's just, you know, you say 100 years from now or 10,000 years from now or whatever.
However long
however long it is.
Yeah.
You just describe, like, a future civilization, and they're working on a huge, like, 4 huge statues or how many players you have. And then you almost describe it in a movie sense of, like, you, like, pan out and you see these 4 statues, and you describe the player characters, and all the people, like, bow down, like, start saying, hail to this person, hail to this person.
When you said 4 statues, sweet. I was thinking of Mount Rushmore, where you have 4, like, heads on a mountain.
You can do that, too.
Hey, that'd be kind of cool.
And another part of Philip's email, he told us about how he is making the blights from the Marvel Universe, from Guardians of the Galaxy, into a playable race. If you remember, I Am Groot, this is that race. And so Groot, he wants to make a blight-like race for his world. And so one of the things he asked was, like, what do you think about that? How do you tie that into a fantasy campaign? And we both were like, that's a sweet idea. Like, cool. That's cool. Like, who doesn't want to play Groot? Like, that's awesome. And one of the things that I threw out was, like, you could have them be related to either the Ents, the tree Ents of the world, just a smaller version, a more medium-sized version. Or I even said, what if they're the male counterpart to dryads?
Yeah, that's
and
true.
He really liked the dryad idea.
Yeah. It makes a little bit more sense. It's easier to come up with some sort of story as to how they got there, too. Because if you're like, you're just a runt of a tree ant, that doesn't sound as good, I think, in my mind, having to come up with some elaborate backstory.
I don't think it would be a runt of a tree, and it would be like a sub-race.
Yeah. Sure.
But yeah, so
which makes sense for it to be the male counterpart of it, a dryad. Yeah.
I also would. I'm just thinking off the top of my head, like, there's never really also a problem with, in my opinion, bringing aliens into D&D.
Yeah.
If you know anything about D&D lore, like, mind flayers are primarily thought. There's like 6 different origin stories for mind flayers, but a lot of people think that mind flayers are aliens. Like, it's about the way you bring it in.
Yeah.
I don't personally want to see a flying saucer.
Yeah,
like you see in the crappy sci-fi movies.
Not the typical
in my
UFO
D&D
style,
game, but aliens are not exactly, in my opinion, untouchable in a fantasy world. It just has to be done in the right way.
Well, it can be done in a way that you don't even say that they're aliens either.
Well, what happens if a meteor lands and the blights, or whatever you want to name them in your world, came from this meteor? Like, there's plant life growing on this meteor, and they come off of it, and you know, it evolves over time or whatever. That'd be pretty sweet.
That would be pretty cool.
But we thought that was a pretty cool idea. I Am Groot, Marvel for life. So, lastly, one of the things that I kind of threw out as an idea for when you're working on races in your world. I started this idea in this campaign I'm doing currently. I'm building a binder full of my own world's races, and taking even the races that are from the D&D books, humans and stuff like that, and writing up lore for them, so you can go, all right, I'm going to be a human this campaign. Let me read up what this book says on how humans are in Atos and everything. And so one of the ideas that I had was coming up with each campaign you do, setting specific races. So for whatever land you're playing in your world, if it's a desert land that you're going to play in, having the races that you can choose, maybe pick like 10 races, 15, whatever you want to do, be races that are the most dominant in that area.
Yeah.
If it's a
make
rainforest,
them pretty specific to it, because it only makes sense that.
And that's that allows you as the DM to come up with, say, here you have a good pick of a variety of races. I'm going to explain to you how these races interact with the setting that we're going to play in, so they get very lore specific on who the races are. And it also allows you to, while you're playing that campaign, then work on the next campaign's races and not be like, oh man, we're going to play a new game tomorrow. I better put together 55 races for my players to choose from. I think it's a good idea. Yep. So thank you, Philip Mainprize, for that email and for giving us content for this episode. Let's move on to the next email.
Here's our first letter from the current mailbag. We've got something from DM Nate. Over the last few years, as the roster of my gaming group has changed, I've shifted back to being a player in 5e after playing D&D in the 80s and AD&D back in the day. After several failed attempts at getting my current crew invested in one of my dark homebrews, I was very discouraged, thinking maybe I'd lost my storytelling chops for good. But the itch never goes away, and about the time I was considering tagging in to run a 5e side quest for my group, I discovered your podcast. Not only did you guys remind me of how much fun a good old-fashioned fantasy throwdown could be, but you gave me a ton of great ideas and inspiration. Most importantly, you made me take a look at the needs of my players, and I realized I wasn't failing as a storyteller. I just wasn't providing them with the type of story and gameplay that they needed for maximum fun. With that in mind, I went old school with Diabolical Dungeon Crawl, and we've been having a blast. So much so that the regular DM has handed over the reins for the foreseeable future. Oh ho ho, you tapped in. Very nice, DM Nate.
Nice.
PPPS, I'd love to hear more material dedicated to food, maybe a full theme episode. It's such a huge part of any culture, game culture included, from the crap we eat while we're playing over the years to the game genre-themed recipes to how food can be worked into adventure hooks. Sharing a meal has become an integral part of game night in my circle, and food themes keep cropping up in our adventures. I'd take seconds or thirds of that. Hashtag food mage. Oh, man.
Nice.
Food mage still lives on.
Yeah, call to action. Anybody that knows how to get a hold of the team that brought Heroes Feast Flavors of the Multiverse, an official D&D cookbook, into existence. Shout us out to them. Shout them out to us. Either direction, because we would love to have an entirely food themed episode.
I'm sure we can figure something out.
I recently started running games for a group who does food. My previous group, it's more of that afternoon session, bring random snacks, usually terrible for you. But the second one has full-fledged meals, typically bought and brought. So I'm a big fan.
We'll do special meals every once in a while, maybe once a month.
Oh yeah, you're over here making pot pies and stuff, man.
It was a rhubarb custard pie. Yeah, it was good.
That's what it was.
It was good.
Okay.
Yesterday was my birthday, so tonight in our game we're recording this obviously in the past, listeners, but tonight we're going to do something fun too, hopefully. Maybe some tri-tip or something. We'll see.
All right. Our next one comes from Twitter. I refuse to call it X. And this one's from I'm for you to envy. Random idea for all. Sentient animated armor for Dungeons and Dragons.
That's an interesting idea. If anybody out there has ever listened to Titans of Altera, previous podcast guest Josh Lorimer, who was part of Sneak Attack as a player, went on to create his own actual play, Titans of Altera. It's not done yet. He's still trying to finish that last season. A lot of people had kids, and he's still trying to land the plane there. But the idea is kind of like Voltron-esque or kind of Power Rangers-esque. You find these suits and you can wear them. The suits are not necessarily sentient, but he's got it so you can speak with whoever was the previous pilot, and they kind of give you ideas or train you or whatever. So kind of like this idea, but it was really fun. I liked the power armor idea, and there's a lot of ways you could go with this if it's just, a magical item that has some kind of sentience, the classic cursed sword or whatever. Yeah, what would you do with this, Neal?
Well, it made me think of Transformers, where it's always super weird to me. If I think about it too much, it gets weird. But where it's the human is inside the robot, as it's going, but also can be inside when it's car mode, but it doesn't seem like it's okay when it's robot mode. But that whole concept is my first thought. My second thought is at the end of the cruise game, there was a pair of players that were kind of doing the Full Metal Alchemist vibe. So one was a Warforged who used to be a gnome, and the other one was a gnome artificer. And so at the end, basically I gave them a sentient suit of armor that they could get back into. Sentience is weird, just because there is some level at which then I need to be the one running it. So I think that's like the only word of caution I would say about this concept is knowing, like finding that line of like, how much should I be running this and how much should they be running it? And hopefully not making something more akin to a familiar opposed to like a whole extra PC that they're running or DM PC that I'm running.
Yeah, I agree. It would be short and sweet. Maybe some kind of limitation to the communication or something to keep it clean and easy. All right, the next up, we've got something from DM Matt. Hey DMs, just found your podcast and I'm hooked. Gonna leave a rating when I have some time. Thanks, Matt. I have been getting back into D&D after 10-year hiatus of work and family, but I'm trying to get my 8-year-old son into playing. I've been thinking of DMing a campaign for just him solo. Any suggestions? Or do you have a podcast that would relate? Can't wait to catch up to the newer stuff. Keep it up. Thanks, Matt. Good question, Matt. I don't have an 8-year-old, so DM Neal is going to be probably better equipped to answer this question as far as that goes. But as far as resources and shows, I have a friend named Steph. They've got a site called TTRPG Kids. And so they've curated a whole list of a bunch of really easy games to teach kids for lots of different age groups, as well as a way to kind of like hack together your own game for your kids specifically based on their interests and that kind of thing. So, yeah, I think that's a good resource. I would start with TTRPG Kids and see what you get from there.
Yeah, Dungeons and Dragons and Daughters. You get to hear Kurt just be an absolute saint and navigate at the start of it, his 2 9-year-old twin daughters through D&D. And that guy's got a lot of editing to do. But he does that. The other thing I would suggest is, solo play or having a solo adventure is actually how I first started in 2nd edition. The person that was getting me into it had like a full crew of pre-gens and I played through all of them. And then afterwards it was like, okay, what did you like what character did you like the most? So not only are you like kind of getting a good feel for all the mechanics, and obviously this method is slower because you're having one person play that many characters, but then by the end, like I was really familiarized with the overall system. I was familiarized with the pieces that I liked more, the pieces that I liked less. So it's definitely a good suggestion. As for the 8-year-old thing, we've had him on, so like I don't feel bad saying this, but I just think it's funny. So Aaron Reynolds writes a book series called Fart Quest, where the main character chooses basically Stinking Cloud as their first spell. So their nickname forevermore is Fart, because it's like you didn't choose Magic Missile or anything. Why would you choose that? So Aaron Reynolds had a short adventure that was set in that setting. And so then I had the kids go through that, and then I've just kind of played into those concepts as they've enjoyed them. So then I think it's really fine anymore. It's so much easier of finding a property that then has TTRPG elements attached to it.
True. Just about, well, not just about, but a lot of kids shows and that kind of thing will have games associated, or you could make something pretty easy.
All right, so we literally just got this email in not too long ago from James, who you're lucky because you got it into us right as we were about to start recording. It's a mailbag episode question where he says this is going to be improvisation as you record. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna see how this goes. And so he says, I'm going to give you an improv challenge where you have to come up with a name and backstory based on the class, race, etc. combinations I provide.
And so we have not looked.
We have not looked at it. I scrolled
I'm excited
down.
And I'm scared.
I will admit I scrolled down because I didn't quite understand what was going on, and I saw 3 things. I was like, "Oh, got to go back up." So I didn't see what they were.
You have an upper hand to me, Chris.
I know that there's 3 things below. I don't know what they actually are, but he says in all caps because it is improvisation. Do not read past this point until you record. I broke that because I didn't know what was going on.
He's gonna have to internet slap you.
He can do whatever he wants. So here's the first one. I'm gonna scroll down slowly so I don't.
So just so I understand,
he has another section that
says a couple things, and we're going to come up with basically if we were making a character or an NPC.
Yep, a name and backstory based on the class, race, etc. And then he has about halfway down. Don't read until the show, as if he didn't trust us to scroll all the way down. All right, first one is a chaotic good dwarf ranger / rogue multi-class.
Oh my gosh, there's so much information to intake while you're trying to be creative. All right, so chaotic good
dwarf ranger / rogue multi-class.
Dwarf ranger / Multi-class.
Yeah, dwarf, ranger, rogue.
All right, Chris, you got first one
All
on
right.
this, dude.
So I have this idea of a dwarf who is smaller than most of his other dwarf kin from a very young age. He never liked to be in the pits brawling with his brothers, who always partook in a lot of wrestling matches and everything that a lot of dwarfs that are rough and tumble like to do. He doesn't like to keep his beard long for stealth reasons, so he keeps it quite trimmed, quite short, which is also very different from a lot of the dwarf kin of his hometown. He doesn't wear the heavy iron armor that he does. He wears the typical either leather or cloth armor, and he carries around a little hand crossbow that he had specially made because he's a ranger, yes, so he has his bow, but for closer encounters he uses poison darted arrows that are quite deadly for his rogue multi-class. As far as a name, gosh, I don't know what his name could be. I don't know. Come back to me on the name part. Mitch, what do you got for backstory?
Come on, name part, come on.
All right. I suck at coming up with names on the spot.
That might be the hardest part of this.
Seriously, it is. I'm fine with coming up with stories on the backside, off the top of my head, but it's the names that I'm just like, where's my
You
random?
like dwarves, too.
I know. I thought about doing like Balfrin, but that's already mine that I use. It's like I can't steal my own. And then I do, like we've said in past podcasts, all of my other characters. I am. I'm trying to come up with something in my mind.
Oh gosh, maybe I'm just gonna have to go.
Yeah, you're gonna have to go.
all right. Chris, you failed that one.
I-
Okay, so what happened was this dwarf called Ogrin Chainbreaker was born in normal dwarf society, but he grew up underground and nobody could ever figure out what was wrong with him because he didn't want to speak. He didn't feel comfortable ever. He just hated. He didn't even know what was wrong with him, but he always felt afraid, always felt out of place until one day when he went on with an exploration group that had to go to the surface, and he never ever felt more free in his life. What Ogrin was dealing with for the first 16 years of his life was claustrophobia. And he could not live underground. The first dwarf who could not live underground. And so when he reached the surface, he felt more free than ever. And this was a big theme in Ogrin's life. He was focused on freedom. He came into contact with the worship of Oldamara, and he loved the idea of being free and seeking out different pleasures. And so he loved being out in the open because he could not be in confined spaces. So he turned to the ways of an explorer and being a ranger right? That's what it was.
Yeah, ranger, rogue, multi-class.
But he also wanted to be a rogue because he took on the scout kind of aspect of his dwarf clan. And so he would go and he would be a messenger for his dwarf clan to say if they need to travel to another human town and discuss with them different treaties and such. He'd be the one to go and maybe scout it out ahead of time. And so that claustrophobia played a big part in his life and got him to where he is today. Chainbreaker, breaking the chains of...
Nice.
Yeah, see?
Nice.
All right. I had a little bit of time to think about it.
Yeah, you did. Did. I stalled not only for my sake, but for your sake.
I'll go with the next one. So, all right.
All right. You ready? Oh, gosh.
I don't know. This one's even harder, isn't it? There's so much stuff he gives us.
It's not hard. It's just really funny. It's a neutral evil gnome barbarian.
Okay,
neutral evil
gnome barbarian.
Barbarian.
You almost played something like that.
I played a gnome barbarian back in the day because I had the twin brothers, didn't we? Me and Tyler played the twin brother gnome barbarians.
All right,
so you got this first.
Names, man. No, I'm just going to start with a name, but gnomes in my world have ridiculous names. So, we're going to name this gnome Baldwin.
You're mouthing a bunch of things.
Baldwin Battlebringer the third.
The third.
Baldwin Battlebringer the third was a gnome barbarian. Is it just
gnome barbarian?
Evil.
Neutral evil. Yep.
And so Baldwin grew up in regular gnome society again, but he was the bully of all the kids, standing at a whopping taller gnome children. I don't know. Standing at a whopping
6 inches.
1 foot tall. He was the tallest of his gnome little kids, and he would beat up all the other gnome little kids at a young age, all the gnome teachers, and they just have the most terrible time with Baldwin. He was Baldwin. They nicknamed him Baldwin the Bully, and that's what he was named.
Gotcha.
One of Baldwin's things when he was a kid was he would break into, even when it wasn't arts and craft time, he would break into the supply closet and take all the paint and smear it over his body.
I thought you were going to say started huffing it.
Well, he would do that too. No, he'd break into the art supply closet, break open all of the paint.
Did he dip the other gnome girl's hair pigtails into the
No,
ink?
he didn't, but he would get completely naked and paint his whole entire body. He particularly liked red, and he would run around the room, and the teachers he got expelled, which led to him not getting a proper education, and so he didn't learn ever how to read, hence being illiterate. So, just not being able to read, being in gnome society where they are all about making businesses and getting knowledge. Baldwin lived outside of the gnome society and just did not. His interactions with gnome society became less and less, except he would break into the village and continue to break into the school and steal arts and supply crafts.
Even when he's
at the
40?
at the age of 30, which one day it just broke. The principal was like, dude, they went to the mayor. This guy's a 30-year-old man running around the school naked with paint all over him. We need to get rid of him. He got thrown out of his gnome group and his gnome society, and now his heart is just blackened by it. And he actually hates every single gnome besides himself, and will go up and try to kill gnomes if they try to bother him. He's more secluded now. He lives right near the dark woods. That's my story.
Oh, okay. He's like a hermit gnome now?
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Baldwin Battlebringer, I think I said.
Nice.
All right, Chris.
All right. My gnome's name is a neutral evil gnome barbarian who his name is Glittercoal.
Glitter Cole. Oh my gosh, Chris. I gave you so much time.
Yeah. Glare. Oh wait, what is
Glitter Gold?
Yeah, I know that part. I know that part. Yeah, that's why I modeled that part after, because he's not quite as nice.
Well, I like that idea. Glittering coal.
Glitter coal. Yeah. So he was from a very young age. He was picked on for a while as a child, and then after a couple of days or a couple of months of this happening, he realized that he wouldn't take it anymore, and this is where the barbarian rage comes into play. And one day he got cornered outside of his house. His parents were gone. They were off working in the back in the shed that they have. And some of these like other gnome and halfling little children that lived around the area decided to start to pick on him. And ever since that day, since he discovered his rage, he gave each of them. Have you ever seen The Simpsons before, where the bully picks on Bart? He ties him to the pole and goes, ha!
Yeah.
That's kind of what he did to all of these children. He like tied them all to the fence posts outside of their houses and just left them there. And ever since then, what he's been known to do since then is he would go around the town, and he didn't like people having really nice things outside of their houses. So like any of their like gardening stuff or any of like their nice like fences or whatever they did to their house, he would always just defile them in some way, stomping on them, pulling out the carrots. What he was also known to do was pull out some of the vegetables from each of the gardens, and he had his own like shack, or this not his shack, but his own like little area in the town square that he would sell other people's like crops that they had each raised for them. And so he was just kind of a naughty little gnome, I guess, for most of his life. I didn't quite get to come up with a whole older self story like the gnome.
I also just realized that Baldwin Battlebringer has the exact same face as Alec Baldwin. So picture that.
Are you sure it's not his brother?
No.
Oh, okay.
Not his brother.
Okay. So, yeah, gnome barbarian. He, that's Glare.
What was his name?
Glitter Cole.
Okay. All right. Well, who was that from?
That was from James Jackal Dewhurst.
All right. Well, thanks, James, for that difficult job.
That was a fun little challenge.
Yeah.
I
all right. Let's get on to some other emails.
Yes.
So for our next one, again from Twitter, we're going to look at what DM Pro Commentary has to say. Hey guys, love the podcast. I started listening to everything from episode 1 and further. And I got some great ideas from your talks on top 10 ideas, monster talks, etc. After listening to the podcast on undead creatures, I've been planning a vampire campaign. But using the Hunter the Vigil rules, which is some of the worst laid out rules book I've ever used. I credit to anybody ever that does a book. I've done a book, and had to walk through the layout. Luckily I had Celeste, as my writing partner on that, but still it's.
Yeah, she's got an eye for design for sure.
No, but it's even then it is still so, I mean, look, you're getting another player's handbook. And like one of the biggest things they're talking about is the readability of it. So from small to the biggest, that is always a difficult thing to do.
I've heard White Wolf books are like particularly bad though. I had some friends run a vampire game. Their whole show concept was they'd run like a one shot in each system and then kind of critique it. And they did a vampire game and they made jokes about like weird lustful poems interspersed with like random rules for like how to drink someone's blood. And then, but just like the order of things and how it was all put together made little to no sense to them. So I've heard this before about these White Wolf games.
Yeah. Well, hopefully the vampire campaign is going well and your players are enjoying it, because those can be so varied. They can be absolute full-fledged horror or what we do in the shadows. And someone's just sending emails and stealing the energy of others. So hopefully it's going well and your players are enjoying it.
But what a great show.
So on Twitter, we're asked by Alex Lindley, DM's Block, is there any secret to make sure your PCs have a valid enough reason to stay together? So the players, their characters in your campaign are having issues with staying together for whatever reason it is. Motivations are different. Characters are clashing. How, as a DM, do we keep them together? So...
yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily like if there's like one specific secret, I guess, that helps characters stay together. But I mean, I guess we can share some things that we've done in the past to help promote togetherness and that you guys are all on the same mission together. And I'll share from my campaign I'm doing now. The specific thing that I did is I started you guys off as friends who grew up in the same city for past, I think the longest or the least amount of time that somebody had been in the city was 15 years. And I think that was Caleb's character, that the whatever kind of, I forget what he was. The Diabolus type creature, yeah. And you guys started out as friends. Your fathers were all on the city council together. They had known each other their whole lives. They had all grown up in the city. And you guys were just, because your fathers were friends, your mothers did motherly things together. You guys just always knew who each other were. You were just best friends growing up. And so it almost set the stage for no matter what was going to happen, big or small, you guys just had each other's backs, regardless of if one person was selfish or one person wasn't, or whatever group dynamics you have. You guys just genuinely cared about each other. You guys had been friends for 20, 25 years, 15 years, 10 years, however long you guys have been around for it. I think in my campaign, that's created more unity than disunity, because there really wasn't anything that you guys would face that would be like, well, I'm not going to go on that because that doesn't affect me at all. Well, no, it does in reality, because it's going to affect your friend. It's going to affect how your friend's doing. And so therefore you guys want to be together. You want to stay together.
And right from the get-go of your campaign, one of the biggest motivators was all of our fathers were being charged for a crime that we knew they didn't commit. And so as their sons, we were all like, we got to prove their innocence.
Yeah.
And so, so we right away we were drawn into it. Not even the fact of having backgrounds together already, but we all had vested interest in trying to help someone else, an NPC that we cared about, family in this case.
Yeah. Well, and even after that, you guys, after you figured out what the cause was and you got everybody off, you guys kind of felt compelled to be like, well, there's bigger things that we have to take care of now, that this can't be happening to other people now. And so there was just
we became criminals together.
Yeah, you became criminals together after that.
Yeah, not that we were actually bad
people. You weren't
people.
actually bad people.
The law was
it
corrupted.
Circumstances, the law of the country that you were in had become
to go
corrupted.
And run together, had allies together. But like this idea of family, having the PCs begin as all being part of the same family, It doesn't need to be immediate family or whatever, but being part of the same family, being friends from the beginning, being business partners, being in the same guild, being in the same clan, whatever it is, you can have them from the get-go be part of the same group. And that gives them an anchor right from the beginning. We talked about it way back in episode 2, Character Creation Nights, and that's a perfect time to sit down before you even play, talk about who the characters that they're going to be playing are, and how they connect with each other.
Right.
It's good for players to sit down and even come up with backstories together and how each other's characters affected each other's backgrounds. That's a great thing to do. We think that giving them the same kind of goals, because most characters will have independent goals, but giving them the same kind of goals together, giving them, even like in my campaign now, all of your guys are focused on a goal. You're not even sure what the goal is, but you're working on this big quest. And now you, as a player, have given them basically a writer's guild that they're all now a part of. And that's another anchor that throws in why are these guys together.
Yeah.
And it's something that you guys will continue on now with giving them, we've talked about on the villains episode, how a villain can draw your characters together.
Villains
Equal hate for a villain.
Yeah.
You could have a group that really doesn't get along with each other, but if they hate somebody else,
they're
even
all
more,
going to set
the
those
enemy of my
petty
enemy
things
is my
aside.
friend. Like we'll work with this guy to take this other guy down.
Yep.
Those are all some really basic ways to give a group motivation to stay together. Now, there is a part of this that I really wanted to talk about when I read this question right away.
I think both of us had this pretty similar thought about this.
There is a misconception that a group staying together, a group of PCs staying together, is the dungeon master's job to keep a group together. And I'm not saying that that's false. However, it is just as much the players' jobs to come up with motivations and reasons for them to stay together as it is the dungeon masters. I've had actual players in my game say, you need to figure out how you can get how you can get my character to continue on with this group. And I've had players who have said that when the reason that they've been saying that is their character is just a complete and total jerk, and they steal from the other players and they betray the other players. And like, I've just had to come around and say to some people like, no, that's your problem now. Like, I can't undo what you've done to piss off both players and characters. This is not my fault. This is something you've done yourself, and you shouldn't create a character that's at fault with the rest of the group. Like, it's not going to work. So sometimes that's just something that a player has caused for themselves. And if that's a situation that you're dealing with, realize that it is not 100% your job to keep players together. It's also the players' jobs they're the ones who come up with their characters. I love it when a player, and by love I mean hate, I love it when a player says, my character doesn't care about your story because he likes this. It's like, you create and control your character. So what you're basically telling me is, I don't want to do that. So you change your thing. And it's like, you can get all into it. And once again, we don't know your guys' groups. If you know what we're talking about, you know exactly what we're talking about. Hopefully you don't.
Yeah, I honestly hope you never have to run across that type of
hopefully you
situation.
don't have it. When you play D&D, you're hopefully playing with your friends, and hopefully you have friends who are mature and don't give you headaches, especially when you are taking on the mantle of DM, putting out the work for week after week or month after month or whenever, how much you do it to make a campaign, and that they're invested in your story and grab hold of your plot hooks. But yeah, it's hopefully not something you have to deal with. But I do think that it is important for the listeners, for every DM out there, to realize, yes, it's important to give plot hooks and things in the campaign that can bring the group together. But once you put that on the plate, if a player crosses his arms and gives you a hard time and gives everybody else a hard time, that's a
totally
problem.
different issue.
Yeah, that's a problem on their side. If you're continuously having problems keeping a group together because you have a player who wants to play a character that's a jerk and stealing from the other players and betraying them, I've had to say to certain people before, certain players at the table, if you do that, I cannot stop the other players, if they find out, turning around with their characters and murdering you.
Yeah.
Because that is completely what in real life in this fantasy world, would probably happen, where like killing somebody is just an everyday thing.
Yeah.
Or throwing them in jail or whatever. It's like, you need to have a dungeon master who wants a group to be together, but you also need players who want to play together and be part of a group. Yep. We've really had to stress this in the past with like sometimes in our group that D&D is supposed to be a team thing.
Yeah.
It's really supposed to be that. Like conflict can be fun, but it needs to be done in the right way and can't leave the table. It has to stay at the table. And in the end, if there's too much conflict, why are they going to stay together? So any other thoughts with that?
No, I think you covered it pretty well.
All right, next up we got Dan the Intellect Devourer. I don't know if you should just tell people that straight up, Dan, but you do you. Happy St. Paddy's Day, guys. Here's a St. Paddy's Day inspired magic item. Wow, thanks, Dan. Halfling four-lobed pipe leaf. Just say, I feel like I should be doing this in an accent. This leaf is not for smoking, lads and lasses. 'Tis rare our leaf has 4 leaves instead of 3. Keep this lucky leaf in your breast pocket, and whenever you need a spot of luck, just say a prayer to old Gar Glitter Gold and close your eyes. Okay. Attunement. At dawn each day, roll a d20. You may substitute this roll for a natural one when you say a prayer to Garl Glittergold, patron of good luck. Only usable once per day. That's fun. Fun little item. Requiring attunement is tough. I might not scale to higher levels, but yeah, cool. Good idea. Nice. Now I must go embrace my dwarvish side. Beard and Irish coffee intensifies. All right. Sounds like Dan had a great St. Patrick's Day.
It's a good one. Wondrous item. It requires attunement. I don't know that I'd give it the attunement, but I do really like the item, especially with that like halfling good luck.
It's a scaled down version of their racial trait, right?
It would also be really fun to have a halfling in the party that is the one that gives it to someone, or that they find. Imagine that though. They just find a 4-leaf. That's such an interesting way to introduce a magic item. Like just by sheer happenstance, finding a 4-leaf clover like during exploration or like during a night watch.
And it's just something that has been imbued with magic that's out in nature, and you find
it. Yeah, because it's a 4-leaf clover.
It is a magical item. Cool. Yeah, that is cool. Most of the time, it's someone has created this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But this one just exists.
All right. So for our last email, we are going to be sharing one that our good friend Corey sent in to us, Nerd Billy, as we like to refer to him as on Twitter. We interact with him a lot. He says, "Hey, my DM brothers," and then he goes into an email about an idea that he has based off of the game Magic. Yeah. And so he plays 4E with this campaign, and he says, a lot of people think 4E is kind of overpowered, and so with this idea of Magic and having all of his players be individual planeswalkers, this is perfect for what he is trying to do with the planeswalkers idea. And so his idea is, in a nutshell, each player is going to be a planeswalker. When they come into combat against each other, instead of them individually fighting each other, like with spells and swords and all that stuff.
When they meet like another planeswalker.
When they meet another planeswalker, they actually play a game of Magic. Mm-hmm. And so what they're doing is they're summoning up these monsters. These monsters are fighting for them. They each have, whatever the allotted health is that they have for each other, and they just fight. And whenever the other person loses, that's how the battle is decided.
And because if he's an enemy planeswalker and only playing a very powerful one, the amount of players that he's versing, the other planeswalkers, he would take that amount of turns. So it'd be like one deck versus 4 decks, but that one deck, that bad planeswalker gets a bunch of turns.
Gets 4 turns, before the other one, or whatever he decides at that point in time. We have some things that we like about this, and we also have some things that we were like, we might add a few things to this if we ever decide to do it. And I think the first thing and most important thing is you're playing D&D, bringing Magic in is cool, but also remember to stay in D&D character. So whatever the planeswalker that you've come up with, actually treat it as if you're standing in, let's say you're in a cave or something like that. You're actually, as a character, summoning up these monsters to fight. So you might be taunting the other person. You might have to say some crazy spell or something like that to have this creature summoned. Make sure you're staying in character. I think
Speak
that can add
as
a lot
your character.
Yeah, I think that could add a lot of things.
Yeah, and if you're not speaking as your character, make sure that you refer to actions that you're doing, I think, as your character.
As your character, yeah.
So you would say, my planeswalker who's named this casts this card, which is, I wouldn't even refer to his cards. I'd say cast this
spell or whatever it is, yeah.
Going along with that, if your group, because we've talked about how you don't have to actually play Magic to take this idea of planeswalkers and other things we've talked about on the Magic episodes, but if you don't have a full group of Magic players, or in general you just don't want to play Magic while you're playing D&D, but you want to play with the lore, you could give... Planeswalkers are built around summoning up creatures, so you could give each player, depending on what their Planeswalker is based off of, if you want to go with that color alignment system, or like their Planeswalkers are focused on these kind of things, you can give them each a number of monsters maybe that they can summon up in battle as like an extra set of powers that they get beyond their class, beyond their race. And what we think would be cool is if you give them a different number of monsters that maybe they only get 1 or 2 per encounter that they can summon up, or per amounts of turns, but making it random. So maybe you give them a couple that are at this certain power level and a couple at this certain power level, signifying that when you play Magic, you get really powerful cards, you get really weak level cards. So maybe you roll a dice to see what creature you're summoning instead of actually picking the monsters that you summon. But that'd be pretty sweet. So you, as the Planeswalker player, your PC would also, during your turn, get to control whatever monsters you've summoned up and tell them what to do. I think going along with that also, what would be pretty cool is, this is something that we just thought of with, once again, this Planeswalker idea. Because Nerd Billy says, if you're going to be a Planeswalker, you should be a Planeswalker in the sense that you should be powerful. Well, I think also, go along with that, if you're going to be a Planeswalker, you should be planeswalking. Yeah. So one thing that we thought about that kind of came from our minds from reading this email was to add more flavor into the fact that your players would be Planeswalkers, is they should be planeswalking, going to different planes at certain points in the campaign. Now, you could just have this preset destination that they go to, but part of the lore behind Magic is that not all Planeswalkers are able to completely control, whether they haven't learned the control yet, to control where they're going to planeswalk to. And there's this idea of traveling to new planes which have never been discovered before. Yeah. So a cool idea would be if you had your planeswalking party decide to planeswalk or have to planeswalk because maybe there's a big bad enemy following them that they need to get away from in a moment's notice. And instead of just going,
well, and it might be that too, where it's like, you're not able to focus on where you're going. You have to do it just like, oh, shoot, I got to get out of here, too.
So instead of going, oh, we're planeswalking to this plane, maybe you as the DM have a list, a numbered list, 1 through 20, 1 through 10, whatever it is, of different planes that they could randomly planeswalk to, and you have the players roll 1 dice, and whatever number that lands on compared to the chart, that's the plane they go to. Adding this element of surprise and not being able to be prepared for the players. Now, that being said, that's a lot of work as a DM. Yeah. So, but if that's something that you're interested in, that could be a very
cool that could idea. Create an interesting tactic for the players too. It's like, if we get separated, what plane are we always going to find ourselves on if we do get separated? So it could add that fun little element in there too. Exactly. A little bit more planning on your part.
Yeah. Or maybe they have to roll like a concentration check for planeswalking, kind of like you were saying. And if there's something else going on that breaks their concentration, they got a negative to it. And if they don't roll it, they don't planeswalk to that plane that they're trying to. In fact, they go somewhere completely different, and you let the adventure from there begin. Yeah. Yep. So those were some great ideas from Nerd Billy and some great ideas from us, I would say. Yeah.
Oh, wow. I'm a big fan of this name. Next up, again from Twitter, is from DM Crispy Toast, spelled with like Chris, CHRIS, P-Toast. Hello, I've been listening to your podcast for about a year now during my drive to and from work. It has given me many ideas for inspiration in the campaign I am running and has encouraged me to begin working on my own world. I'm currently on episode 113, DMing for kids. It's a theme. It's a theme. Is that our theme? I don't know.
Yeah, if we've covered it before, maybe it's time to recover it.
First and foremost, huge shout out to anyone that starts from the beginning and tries to catch up. You heard a noble goal.
I'm in the middle of it right now.
Yeah, I commend you all who do it. But I also agree, like, one of the biggest downsides of not having to drive consistently for work is my lack of podcast time. Because I was just so used to, I used to drive 40 40 minutes each way. And man, I put in some podcast work. I put in some work. It's to the point where I'm like asking friends, family, and strangers on the street, do you have a podcast I can listen to? And now we're at the point in podcasting where friends, family, and people on the street are like, I've got a podcast you can listen to. But yeah, so DMing for kids. You know what? We may, as much as we talked about what DMing is like in 2024, I think it would be beneficial to have that same conversation geared around DMing for kids in 2024. I think things have fundamentally changed in the way that like just kids interact with technology in general. And I think it would be a lot of fun. And I know people I know a line to a guy who does it as his full-time job and has amazing reviews. So we may go that direction.
I also know some folks who do it professionally, so I'm sure out of all of the lists of folks we know, we'll find someone good.
Best case scenario, we get them in a room and they talk to each other and then we just edit.
Oh, that would be perfect. They can start their own podcast talking about that very subject.
Listeners just learned that Neal likes to run the podcast the way he likes to DM his table. If I can get everyone to talk to each other, I've done my job.
I don't have to talk anymore. Yeah, I agree. Those are my favorite times too.
All right, so our mailbag of holding entry comes from Mr. DM Nate, a story with some plot holes. Hey guys, in episode 8, you guys were talking about your favorite funny stories, and it reminded me of one of my own. I was playing a rogue, and at one point I was sneaking ahead of the party to scout and stumbled straight into a camp of lizardmen. I had been having good luck earlier in the night and thought, I can sneak around these guys and steal some of their weapons. No biggie. Course. I then proceeded to roll 2 crit fumbles in a row and got skewered in the chest with a spear and downed in 2 hits. Of course, that's what happens when you're the rogue. You have these amazing abilities. Greedy, man. You have these amazing abilities of sneak, and you actually get to use them, and you stink at them. Yep. The party took my character to a healer. That's nice. And had managed to get me somewhat conscious. And the DM made the mistake of asking me if I say any request to the healer before I go under. I told him, if possible, please leave the hole through my chest. All right. Then I passed out. Of course. Yeah, you should. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with it at the time, but I figured it would be the kind of dumb thing my character would say.
I guess his character is pretty dumb.
Yep. I want to feel the breeze through my chest.
Leave the hole. Leave it.
It's like Gumby. You remember Gumby back in the day?
I remember
There's
Gumby.
like the episodes where like he'd get the hole in his stomach or something. It's crazy. Several sessions later, we were in a bar, and I decided to start a bar fight to test the game's non-lethal combat, since my friend had just come up with it. I smashed a bottle and made a shiv and tried to stab this guy at the bar while yelling, "Bar fight!" Clearly, I was not thinking straight.
Clearly.
The DM gave me a stern look and said, "You are about to shank this guy with a bottle. Are you sure?" And without hesitation, I just rolled the attack and got a crit success. So I annihilated this innocent dude.
Man.
I think you got a hole through your head and not through your chest.
I'm sure your DM was so happy you decided to help him out by testing out his system.
So he continues on. You can bet yourself that the guards of the town were after me at that point. What with everyone running out of the bar calling me a murderer. Surrounded, I looked at the DM straight in the eye and said, "I feign my own death." He laughed and said, "What? How?" I said, "You remember that hole in my chest? I stabbed myself straight through it and faked like I Everyone had forgotten about the dang hole until this point, so the whole table just busted out laughing. He made me roll a perform check, and we lost it as I rolled another crit success. So my character perfectly fakes his own death, and the guards just hauled what they thought was my dead body off to a mortuary and left me there. Thanks for taking the time to hear my story. Keep making the awesome podcast.
That's fantastic.
I think that story in and of itself is like the epitome of like every player we hate, like just trying to ruin the game, and at the same time every player we
making
love,
memorable moments.
Every player that we love because they really got into character and made these awesome moments for people.
I'm glad that we got to read that story. That's so funny. And that was from DM Nate. So thanks, DM Nate, for that funny story with some plot holes. We appreciate that. So,
all right. We've got something from the Absurd DM. First, I love your guys' podcast, and I have moved on from D&D and now use some skills from programming RPGs for personal use. I agree that I loved 3.5 versus the new versions. Okay, yeah, he's a 3.5 guy. Question. I have always thought to myself that paladins can only worship Hieronius or Moradin. Why can't other gods have paladins also? Like St. Cuthbert could call a lawful neutral player to be a paladin to correct a wrong. Always wanted to do this in a campaign, but no one was ever interested. Yeah, you've got the background in 3.5 here, Neal. So hit me with your paladin knowledge. What do you think?
All right, if we go all the way back, one of the things was only having lawful good paladins, and then you basically have a fallen paladin. And those were kind of your binary choices of, I mean, we'll just say it the way it was said for many years, and it is what it is. But people often referred to the paladin as lawful stupid. And I think it's a nuanced approach because you're asking someone to think about a way to run a character in a way that, like, typically that's not how people approach their day-to-day lives. Like, you have a strict set of rules that you're supposed to follow. And most people would approach those rules without nuance when in the game. Because it's mechanical. Like, it's told you how to run the character and you run it that way. I am of the mind that, yes, in a lot of ways, I would almost, if I were going to really reflavor this and just really allow paladins, I would almost want the word champion rather than paladin. I'm totally fine with paladin and having any alignment or anything be that, or them follow any deity because they've been called, just like you're saying. But like, if you wanted to like kind of scrub the numbers off a little bit and make it, verbally feel a little better, champion would be the word I would go with. But you're still getting you're still getting the power from the person you're following or the person that you've asked. Something really interesting would be to like have an all paladin group, and all of them have been like the chosen one from their deity to resolve some terrible calamity that's happening. So I think that's a way that, like, I would frame it. Yeah, again, if someone really has a hang up, just calling it a champion. And then, having basically everyone just waking up in the middle of the night and then coming together as a group to right whatever wrong from a narrative perspective. Then you can have the how be kind of your internal conflict within the party. I mean, definitely watch out for, obviously, if it goes too far. But still having those discussions of like, well, that's not how I think I should be doing it as the champion of. And then the other person saying roughly the same thing, but all inevitably working together.
Yeah, I never played an older version where there was such restrictions. So a paladin to me has always just been whatever someone wants it to be. Whoever they want to serve, however they want to play it is fine with me. So yeah, I think I'm fine with that too. And I like your idea of kind of rebranding it if necessary. The phrase being a champion of something or someone is pretty cool. It's fun, flavorful way to roleplay it.
Our next one comes from Jake. He writes, I'm a relatively new DM. I run a few one-shots, but recently I started my first full-scale campaign. The DMB has been invaluable for helping me flesh out what I want my players to experience in a fresh way. Here's a topic that I would love to hear you two discuss. We're going to right now. In most lore and media, characters aren't constantly getting new and more magical items. They have one impactful item that is integral throughout their story. I'm trying out the same thing with my players with what I'm calling their campaign items. Wondrous items that, for one reason or another, is relevant to their backstory, gets more powerful as their proficiency increases. Thanks, and keep up the great work. The podcast is awesome. So thank you for that, Jake. Yeah, what do you think about that, Chris?
Yeah, I guess for me, the thing with D&D is like, I love that there's so many types of magical items that you can get. I mean, like I was just looking at the Dungeon Master's Guide the other day, and there's like 80 pages of magical items, like wondrous items and things like that. I love the fact that there's so many magical items. You can craft so many different types of magical items. That being said, every time I've ever been a player, I'm like, if I have these, it's great. If not, I almost like it better, because if I have way too many of them, or if I give out way too many of them, as a DM, it gets really hard sometimes to like make proper battles because everybody's so stinking overpowered. And even as a player, sometimes I'm just like, I like the idea of not having 70 different items that I can carry around with me or have the capability of carrying around with me. I think I got that because in Skyrim, I always felt super overpowered all the time. You know how you can like constantly do whatever you want with it. So for me, I like the idea of only having 1 or 2 possibly magic items within a game. It just makes the game feel more balanced, and it makes people really like have that moment of awe when they get this item that shouldn't be a normal thing for them, if that makes sense at all.
He's giving them like it sounds like one specific item, whether it's a weapon or their armor or a trinket or whatever it is that is specifically to their character. It's built into their background. And like I've seen players do this before where we've worked and we've been like, here's this sweet item that you start off with. It's a little bit better than your normal stuff. It's from your background. Like, oh, this is my father's sword. But I've all too often also seen situations where players want to do that and they start off with that. And then a better weapon comes along. And so they throw their father's sword to the side.
Because it's not as good.
Like, story-wise, that makes absolutely no sense. So I really like that Jake is taking and running with this idea of this is going to be your campaign item. This is going to stick with you, and we're going to better this as the story goes along. In your new campaign, which we're going to start the very first session tonight, my Goliath Barbarian character has a maul and he has hand axes. And I went so far to go and get a Hero Forge mini where he's holding a maul and a hand axe.
And the hand axe you forgot to paint, and it's not going to be a ghost item.
Because
I
wanted some of that translucent like sweetness to that mini. But so like in my thinking with that, I was like, well, I want him throughout this campaign, those to be his main weapons. And so I've done this before as a DM where I've had players say, hey, I want this to be my main weapon. And like, so it's like, cool, that makes sense. Because I like when players go, this is important to my story, and they're getting into their story rather than mechanics, and I want to reward players who really enjoy story and want to get into story. And so there's different ways you can do that, such as my immediate thought was Final Fantasy with the materia. There are these magic items that you put into slots in your weapons, and so you can take a regular weapon in Final Fantasy and you can give it different aspects of magic. So it can be like absorbing health, it can be like you do ice damage, and you could do something like that in D&D where you could have something along those lines, whether you call it materia and just rip off Final Fantasy or like magic gems or whatever it is, and just have something that you can like
infinity gems, whatever you want to call them.
You can put in like slots in your weapon and give them specific magical power-ups basically, so that maul that your character always uses is always what they're using, because it's not about buying new weapons or about acquiring new weapons as treasure, but it's about getting like upgrades. I mean, you could do upgrades to the items themselves, like, oh, I'm taking the head of the maul and taking it off and making it out of cold iron, which gives it other different properties. And so it's the same weapon that you've been using, you've just upgraded it. You can enchant them with different magics along the way. I like that idea, because there are a lot of characters, like he says, in all different lore that Zelda, you always see Zelda on posters, even though he does get different items in the game. You always see Zelda with his sword.
Yeah.
You always see Cloud from Final Fantasy, even though he does get different weapons, like you always see him pictured with his sword. There's iconic items that it's like, even like Skyrim, like you always see the pictures of the Skyrim character and he's always got that armor. Nobody actually wears that armor in the game.
Because the armor you get is trash.
It's trash from right off the bat. But like if you do something like Jake is doing, which is fantastic, you can take that like aesthetic look to a character. And we realize this is a pretend game, but I mean, when you get to like minis or just in the fact of like describing your character, I think it is cool to say, I have this one weapon. And if you're going to do that, you should also name your weapons. I'm a huge fan of naming weapons. Like once you give a weapon a name, I feel like it just makes it way cooler.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's just a fantastic idea. Just figuring out some way that your players can have, I like what he names them, campaign items that are going to be throughout the campaign. And you not only watch the character grow and level up, but you watch the weapon grow and level up. It's pretty sweet.
Yeah, I really like that idea.
So thanks, Jake. We appreciate you writing in about that. We love that idea. We would love to hear how that's going for you in your campaign.
Our next one is again from Twitter, and this one comes from DM Radlanad. Hey guys, I'm doing my first session as a DM tomorrow, taking over from my younger brother. You guys have opened the door for me. Suddenly it's not so scary to take the responsibility of handling the game. You guys are awesome. My little secret is I will kill them all. Thanks, guys, for making DM accessible.
I mean, we do tell them to kill their players every episode, right? That's
true.
What we're saying. We're saying you need to play God and kill all the characters every episode.
Yes, every episode. Yeah. Yes. No, just merely that you're capable. It's merely that you're capable. It's not a piece of advice.
Really misread that. Okay.
Yeah, just that you have the ability. Okay, we've brought it up before, but I'm still of the mind of a full-fledged, just absolute TPK. You can set it up to happen when you want, but it's going to feel railroady. So you almost need to let it happen when it does, and then they find out like that the afterlife is broken. And so then they have to basically Robin Williams it and get what dreams may come.
I feel like you could drop some hints leading up to it, like people are dying, but maybe something that's supposed to happen isn't happening, like the new star that's supposed to show up in the sky doesn't show up, or, you know, the magical carving of them on your family's mausoleum doesn't show up, and so there's some disconnect. And then you do the TPK, and then it's like a mystery to be solved, and they're not so worried about it.
And then you come across a group of paladins who are all from different deities who are also trying to solve this problem.
Yep.
Done. We're getting there. We're getting there. Awesome that we helped you feel that way. It is literally our only goal. We have talked about a lot of things, but the one thing that we know, no matter what, is that we hope to inspire people to just start DMing, keep DMing, take a break when you're supposed to. It's just whatever we can do to inspire you to have the most fun as a dungeon master.
All right.
Back to you.
So our next one comes from Frotastic, and he is from our Patreon Dragons. And so he writes creative block, and it's very simple. What do you do when you have creative block? ? So I'll open it up. Mitch, what do you do when you have creative block?
You listen to the Dungeon Master's block.
We listen to ourselves. Duh.
Of course, that's what you do when you have creative block. We say it all the time on the show, but I think that having some way, whether it's your phone or literally carrying around a notebook, is a way that you can kind of try to eliminate creative block. Writing down every idea that you ever get. like I've had dreams before that I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I'm tired, but I make myself grab my phone and write down like an idea because I'm like, that dream was weird or scary or whatever it was, but something about that, I'm like, that'd be cool in D&D, which shows how obsessed I am with this game. Yeah. That's my thought when I wake up from a dream.
Most people do it like, all right, I have something that I have to do for work tomorrow. I can't forget it. I got to write it down. No, it's just like, I got something I have to do.
Dungeons
and
Dragons, man. Yeah. And so, like, I think I write down constantly notes into my phone. We've talked about, like, Evernote. You can download that as an app on most phones. You can carry around a little notebook in your back pocket or in your purse or whatever, your merce, whatever you have, and write down the ideas as they come to you. I do a lot of my thinking in downtime. So like if I'm driving somewhere and I'm not listening to a podcast, or I am listening to a podcast and I glean ideas from it, write down those ideas so that hopefully, like, if you have I don't know what to do this next session, you can refer back to these notes that you've compiled of like all these great ideas and take that from there.
Yeah. I think something that I do a couple of different things. I read short stories. I also go and I will look up, like the other day, when I was trying to come up with this next campaign idea, I didn't know what I was going to do. And I just was like, I don't really know what would be kind of fun. And so I looked up Hawaiian island culture and I just started going off of that and like started reading history and things like that. And so I look up different histories of cultures and learn many, many things from them. And like there could be like one person or thing or mythological story or something that I think through and change a little bit. I also look at world religions because there's some crazy stories within religions around the world. I do a lot of just digging and reading and working through things. And if there's an idea that I like, I'll write it down and then I'll come back to it later and just expound on that. Like there was even something for tonight's campaign where like I was going through and I was working and I was just, doing whatever. And all of a sudden it just came to me and I was like, oh, that's brilliant. I'm going to do that instead of whatever I was thinking. And so like I came up with an idea, I flushed it out, and then I just constantly revisit it and just see like, okay, is that still like the best idea that I have, or can I think about something? Because I think time can help you get over creative block too. Like if you just let something sit for a while and then come and revisit it, that can help out a lot too. So those are some of the things that I do in order to get over creative block.
I also think, Chris, you mentioned like getting inspiration from other sources. I think talking with other people who are DMs is perfect. And obviously, Frotastic does that because he's on our forums, but like, shout out for our forums. It's a fantastic place to bounce ideas off of other DMs who aren't going to be in your games. So, like, giving stuff away there is not going to be giving stuff away to your players.
It's crazy. They're building a whole world.
Yeah.
I'm watching it and I'm just like, wow, that's crazy. Like the DMnastics has turned into building this world of DMB.
Yeah.
It's crazy, right?
DMB.
It's super,
It's awesome.
super crazy. But
yeah, talk with other DMs, talk with other GMs, talk with other people who are interested in the same kind of thing as you are and aren't going to be in your campaign and have ideas ruined for you, and just bounce any ideas off of them that you have. Or even, if you do have this creative block and you're at a point in your campaign where you're just like, I don't know where to go from here. Like, ask other people, be like, okay, so even if you've built yourself into a wall, guys, I've built myself into a wall. I have no idea how to get out of this. Does anybody have any ideas? Like, I'm sure that there are so many creative minds out there that you can find other people that can give you inspiration and maybe even say something that makes you go, oh, that is a cool idea. And how can I twist that to be my own personal thing? But that would be our advice on that. Thanks, Frotastic.
Next up, our email comes from DM Tim. Hey, gents, after listening to your podcast for a while, I've got to say that I've learned quite a lot from you. Your raw episodes and Bringing the Magic episodes in particular have given me new tools to brainstorm and create all sorts of things for my own campaign. Good, it's working. My group just started a new campaign not so long ago and released it as a podcast because somehow I thought I had enough free time to record and edit. So I wanted to say thanks for all the work you do. My players are reaping the rewards of your wisdom. Cheers. Cheers to you, DM Tim. And if you're hearing this, you should send us the name of your podcast so we can tell folks to go listen to it.
Well, let's see how well the internet works. How good is Neal's Google Foo? Okay, apparently I can Google, but I can't type, so that's fun.
So after a quick Google, DM Neal has determined that DM Tim's show is called Knights and Nerds. So it looks like they've published stuff very recently, so go check it out. There's a few years worth of actual play if you are interested. So thanks for the kind words, DM Tim.
Yep. And definitely, go check it out. They just dropped the finale of their current season. So now or shortly thereafter is the perfect time to catch up.
Our next one comes from Dylan. And Dylan writes in, this is another story, but I think this is a fantastic story from his campaign. So he writes in and he says, today in my campaign, my adventurers were investigating what looked like a medium-sized explosion in the woods when they were approached by a hooded man with grotesque markings and boils on his body. Darion, the Dragonborn, tried to shake him down for all he knew about the explosion, and while throwing the hooded man to the ground, the man pulled a card from his belt pouch and threw it on the ground.
I didn't recognize the story when you first started telling it, but now I remember the story.
Fantastic.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
This is so good.
When the card landed, a minotaur appeared between Darion and the hooded man. The man then removed his hood and began to laugh. He explained to Darion and his characters that he is of a select few who can travel through the different dimensions. These people are known as dimensionals in this world. He goes on to explain that he is a collector of champions, and he has been traveling the dimensions, collecting souls of fallen champions and trapping them in soul cards, or, if you haven't caught it by now, Magic the Gathering cards, giving them an army of creatures and soldiers trapped in his control. The collector said he's been around for centuries and does this for entertainment. He throws the players a deck each and challenges them to a 4-on-1 battle against him, and if they win, the collector vanishes, leaving the cards they used. But if any of the characters loses, their souls are trapped in a card and put in the collector's collection. I haven't come up with what happens after they lose, but I was thinking that they get trapped in the cards and they get sent to a spirit world where the others who are trapped should go. And then they should have to figure out how to release themselves. It's a cool integration of Magic and D&D. It's called Game of Souls, and while playing, the players can use skills they have to do things in-game, like roll a sleight of hand check, and if they roll successfully, they can draw 2 extra cards, or use an attack against the man with the cards during the Game of Souls. If they win, they intimidate him into forfeiting. Sincerely, Dylan. So, Dylan, that is fantastic. I think we've talked about Planeswalkers on our campaign before.
Yeah.
We've talked about bringing the game of Magic into the game of D&D. It almost like this Pokemon sense, like with Dungeons and Dragons. I guess I've always even thought of it just as monsters, but when you play Magic the Gathering, there's humans, there's other races, there's elves that you can use as creatures. And like, I love this idea of the Game of Souls, that this guy he considers himself a collector and is just doing this for entertainment purposes. I think of the Collector from Marvel, and I'm just like, that's totally what this guy's like.
Yeah.
Like so much of a sociopath that he doesn't care, that he's like ruining these people's lives and he's taking them as like, you're my object. But I love this idea of like trapping different monsters and different creature souls inside of Magic cards or whatever it is, and then being able to have them to throw out and be able to fight for them. Like, that's just fantastic, and this would be such a great idea to implement into a campaign.
Yeah, it's like being able to summon a creature as a wizard or druid or something, but multiple times, and you get to fight with it. It's just a super. I love this idea. Like, this is a really, really cool idea to me. And I know other people have tried. I know we've answered other emails kind of like this. I think Nerd Billy had one back in the day. Do you remember this at all? He had something with Magic that he was trying to do, and so I know Magic is something that people have tried to incorporate in the past. And it keeps coming up, and I just think all of the ideas that we've had are just absolutely phenomenal. So thank you very much, Dylan, for this email. And if you guys have any other emails about Magic being incorporated, we would love to hear them too.
I would love to see a statted out dimensional, like level by level for like 5e or 3.5 or whatever it is. And I think it'd be interesting to like get like the really cheap Magic cards, because there's so many Magic cards that you could get for like, I mean, you could get a stinking box of Magic cards for $20 for 1,000 of them. But if you could like set some really cheap Magic cards and be like, at this level, at level 1, you have access to these creatures, and then like it's just a vanilla Minotaur card that you throw out, and that, you know, I mean, that's pretty tough for level 1, but like if you are drawing at random and things like that, this could be a really cool, I feel like, character to play. Like, I'd love if this was statted out to be able to play something like that.
Or you have somebody that has, like, you have somebody that needs to train, and so they have these cards that they can throw down and use to train against and things like that. I think that would be really interesting.
So get on statting it out, Dylan.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
Come on, figure it out, man.
Thank you, Dylan. We really, really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Our next one is from, it's brought to you by DM Me Eric's Night, or Mirk's Night. Who knows? I've been listening for a long while. I just listened to episode 115, and I have a suggestion. You brought up the idea of a traveling wizard school, and I think that is an awesome idea. I know of a story that takes this to an extreme degree and has many twists, and it is entitled The Island by Tim LeBon. It's a mysterious island that appears overnight and wreaks havoc on the lands nearby as tidal waves and water beasts destroy much of the coast. The appearance of the island interferes with all magic. A small group begins exploring this new and forbidden island and discovers the source of magical disruptions and many other surprises. I highly recommend this book. So there you go. Listener, if you are looking for such a thing, you can go find The Island by Tim LeBon.
So our next one comes from DM Neal. He is also on our Patreon Dragon forums as well. And he says, finish this story! ! Have you ever had a story go on hiatus and picked it back up later, i.e. months later, years later, etc.? Same characters, same level, new adventure kind of thing. Signed, forever yours, Jote Maniac. I've never, as a DM, ever tried to pick up a story again months and years later. I've had campaigns that I've tried to pick up again as a player that I've been in, and it's always hard. Like it's always just people forget why they were invested. I think, and this has been my experience. I'm not saying it'll be anybody else's experience, but my experience was that it was hard to pick up. It was hard to remember exactly what happened last time. It was hard to get back into the emotional state of mind that I was in playing that character. In the end, it was one of those things that we all just kind of decided, this isn't worth our time to try and get back into the swing of getting to know this character again. Part of that was because the DM was kind of fickle in his schedule and was never really sure if we were actually going to play or not. So it was always like, hey, we'll get back together, and now we can't. Hey, we'll get back together. Now we can't. So I think you can. I think it would take a very special group of people to get back together and do it.
Yeah, I think that once even one player starts to lose that drive to do it and to continue on. I've had players who wanted to pick up a campaign that just kind of fell apart years later, and they're like, I'd love to go back and finish that and play this character again. But the idea of getting the entire group together to be able to do that with the time that, and figure out a time, and to get the entire group together and happy to, at this point, probably remake their characters at the level they were at, and to re-get into their characters, to get everybody to do that, I feel like is just such a difficult task. And as a DM, like, I have a game like that players have tried to do and been like, can we go back and do this? And I'm like, it'll be different players at different times. And I'm just like, no. And part of that is because that campaign fell apart because problems with the players. Yeah. And so I'm like, well, that campaign didn't fall apart because I wasn't into it. It fell apart because you guys were being immature, right, and turning a game into a feud. And so I don't really have any, in my mind, I'm like, well, I figured out how that campaign ended as far as lore and story in my world, and that's good enough for me. But I mean, I have had planned campaigns where, for specific reasons, I know that we're going to have to pick up a couple months later. Like in college, I would go back to New York during summer break, so I knew that we were going to have to put a hold on certain campaigns, and so that was planned out, and we were able to pick up after
planned
the summer.
Out are much easier to come back to, I would think.
Yeah, I think in a planned sense it can still fall apart, but you can put a campaign on hold for a month, like for Christmas break or for summer break or whatever it is, and get back into it. And even with those, sometimes like those first sessions, it's like, wow, I've forgotten how to role play my character.
Well, we
like,
even had that last winter too, when like you were gone a lot, and then I had things going. It was just like, all right, how do I play this character again? What's going on? Yeah.
But I think if you know that something like that's going to happen, like if your group is in college or whatever it is, and so you aren't together during the summer, you need to, as the DM, end off at a specific point. You can't just end off the night. You need to plan to like end on a cliffhanger in the story to keep the players like talking about it, to keep them thinking about it, to keep their interest high of like, oh man, we left off at this point. I really want to know how things work out for these characters, for what happens in this story. Not just we ended on a night that nothing really important happened and things can fizzle out. You need to like keep that interest level high. But I would agree, Chris. I think for the most part, the answer is no. The campaigns that have kind of fallen apart for not planned, all the campaigns that I've played in that have fallen apart for not planned reasons, they have not gotten finished. And it's so hard to get everybody together again, to get that interest together again. And honestly, for me as a DM, it's like, for some of the players who want to do that, I'm like, well, I have new stories to tell now.
Right.
I want to keep moving forward, but at the same time, it's important to finish your stories. We've talked about that before, and now I strive so hard to not let a campaign fall apart, because it sucks when campaigns fall apart and you don't get to finish them.
I think one thing, too, is if it's scheduling errors that are getting in the way, I think if you can get some sort of consistency back into your schedules, I think that can help, if that's part of the problem. But if it's lack of interest from people, it would be really hard. So, yeah, thanks for that question, DM Neal. I'm sure there's a lot of people that are wondering that same sort of thing, because they, like, as DMs, we really want to tell our story, and if we can't kind of bugs us a little bit. And so there's always that, like, what if we got back together type thing. So thank you for asking that question.
Next up, we've got DM Ukraglar the Mighty. He's got some questions for us. Number one, what are some interesting or fun mirror I could incorporate into my game? I love the idea of mirrors and want to have more of them in my game. Question number two, what are some tips you have on designing both a mega dungeon and encounters or puzzles in it? So his two questions are about incorporating fun mirror and mega dungeons. So first of all, if I were to introduce a bunch of automatons into a game of mine, a bunch of mirror, for listener background, mirror are something from Magic the Gathering that I believe DM Mitch ported over into his game and had them existing in his world. So I feel like automatons are fun in ways like Skyrim, where you've got dungeons full of these things that are still working, but there's no kind of rhyme or reason to why. No one knows why they exist or what they're doing, but they still exist underground and are still, performing tasks even though their masters or their owners or creators are long gone. That's always fun to me. It's an interesting mystery to unravel. Or you could always use them as minions for a villain, or perhaps they have, come to some kind of sentience themselves and are trying to create a society that exists outside of normal humanoid society. And, you could explore the intricacies of that kind of political intrigue. Those are my ideas.
Yeah. The other thing I think of is it's kind of there. It's like the auto gnomes. Like if you're trying to introduce them as a race, because they kind of look like evolved mousers from the Ninja Turtles, like the way their head shape is.
Yeah, sure.
It almost has like this bird-like beak to it. So you could introduce them as like playable characters. But if not, I think it's also a really interesting foil to Modrons. Mm-hmm. Like having them be like the more chaotic. Because all of the versions I see is like brass, copper, alpha, alloy, gold, dark steel. It's literally like anything they find, they're going to make more of themselves out of it. Plague, lodestone. And so you also have like a lot of versions that you can play. Like lodestone is just like absolute just beef. Like this thing is, it looks like a tank. And so like there's a lot of versions that I think you could do. So
yeah, that's an interesting idea. I like that. Like they're creating a hive of themselves and building more and more. Yeah. So Mega Dungeon, I know you've had some experience, Neal. What's your tip or trick on designing a Mega Dungeon?
I think conceptually you have to have free space. I don't think that's talked about a lot. I think that like when you look at Undermountain, and I think that when you look at a lot of things that like even I would design, like your instinct is to design it like a designer would for publishing, in the sense that like every space on the page needs to be important. So then when you see this map, and then there's also something cool about a map that you lay out that's the size of your dinner table and every room has something in it. Conceptually, like I don't think that that's really how, real. You get it. But like I don't think that's how a mega dungeon would function. And so having more of locations that they go through, which are in rooms, is kind of how I approached when I ran Undermountain as kind of like a one-shot thing. Where the idea is that like you went from one room and then we're just having you be in the next room or the corridor or whatever. Like the idea I think that makes a mega dungeon feel really big is the amount of empty space that you can do. Because if it's always something, if it's always a trap, if it's always a monster, if it's always an NPC, if it's always a struggle, I think that's when it gets old. Like you don't have this feeling of forward progress, or they never feel safe enough to take a rest, or which is also fine. And one of the reasons that it worked so well in Undermountain is because you had so many ways in and out. But one of the things about Undermountain is that you would go in for a quest, basically.
Something specific instead of just like, we're going to go see how far we can get down this tunnel kind of thing.
Yeah, like this family heirloom of a necklace is in Undermountain. I know it is. If you go through the back wall of our family crypt using this key, then it will let you in. But like, I haven't been able to get in there. I can't fight these monsters that are on the, directly on the other side because it's Undermountain. And so like the ability to enter and leave also becomes really important.
Well, hopefully those ideas help you out there, DM Ukriglar the Mighty, and may your hammer be mighty.
Our next email comes from Matt. He writes in a story to us about DMing. He says, "Hi guys. First off, I would like to say that I love the podcast and have gotten a lot of ideas from you guys, not just as a DM, but also as a player. I found it a couple weeks ago and have listened to almost all of them in my drives to and from work. Keep up the great work. The second part of this email requires some history. So I have been playing D&D off and on for well over 20 years, all the way back to the AD&D days. I have tried DMing a couple times over those years, but never really got into it until a couple weeks ago. I got an idea for a story and asked the group that I play with if they wouldn't mind if I gave it a go, and thankfully they agreed. During the session, I had a couple moments that really made me love DMing. The first was I was describing a room that they were entering, a very dark room that their torchlight is barely able to penetrate, and they hear a sound of shuffling and creaking. At just that moment, one of the players opened the door, it made a creaking noise, and another of the players just about jumped out of her chair. It was awesome. The second instance happened when an NPC was talking to one of the characters. The NPC is a young girl who happened to be a ghost. I realized that the player was talking to me as if I actually was a young ghost girl, and it was at that time I realized she was really into the story I was telling. Again, it was awesome. Anyway, hope you guys enjoy my little tale. Again, keep up the good work. Sincerely, Matt. And Matt also lives in Grand Rapids, near us. So shout out to Matt. So, well, I got to say, I think that this is awesome because I think this is, like he said, he's tried DMing before and he just never really liked it. But I think this is a great story of like falling in love with DMing for the first time.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, anybody listening to this podcast, most people I imagine listening to this podcast love DMing. Like, I think we have some people who listen to this podcast and don't DM, but for the most part, people who listen to this podcast know what Matt is talking about, that feeling of just like, oh, that's such a sweet moment when your players are just so into your story that either a door opening freaks them out, which we talked about on the horror podcast, how it is hard to scare players. So first off, well done.
Yeah.
That's an achievement in itself. But like, and then watching your players like really strive to like forgetting the outside world and just talking in character to the characters you're playing, like it's just such an awesome thing. And I thought this was a great story of just falling in love with DMing that had to be shared because I think we can all remember one of the times, at least in recent games, that it's like, oh yeah, that was a fantastic DMing moment. Or a lot of us probably remember our first time DMing and why we fell in love with it. And just those moments of like, this is awesome. My players are into the story I'm telling. So thanks, Matt. We appreciate that, fellow Grand Rapidian.
Grand Rapidian. Bring back the Rapids.
The next one is brought to us by DM Widmer. I'm sure you hear it a ton from a ton of people, but you guys have an absolutely fantastic podcast. Thank you for the work you put in. Much appreciated. That's it. That's why we do it. It's stuff like that. Like if we can inspire someone to start a game or stay in their game or make their game better, then we did it. Everything else is nice. Potentially getting review copies of things or going cool places. But at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is that right there.
All right. So our next one is from Vulash, and he writes, based on inside information. When your characters do something with the potential to be cool, but based on your inside information as the DM that it wouldn't work out like they expect, what is your first reaction? So that's his question. For example, I built a small dungeon with bugbears and gnolls, and instead of entering the cave complex, they plugged up the smoke hole, natural crack in the rock, and put magical darkness over the only entrance and waited. I know, based on the layout of the cave system, that it would have been a minor convenience at best for the monsters inside. Not only that, but it would have tipped them off and basically forced the party to enter a fully alert dungeon, or at best, faced an entire group at the cave entrance at once. Alternately, I could stretch the narrative a bit and roll with the scene to help the characters create a cool scene in which they get to flex their innovative muscle and prevail. What do you do when things that your players do could work, could potentially be cool, but you know based on your inside information as the DM that it wouldn't work out like they expect? What do you think about that, Mitch?
I've had this happen a lot of times. A player comes up with something that I think that's really creative. Like, that's awesome that you're thinking along those lines. And sometimes you'll watch players and you'll present a problem to them, and even like the whole group gets involved and they're planning something out and they're taking like 30 minutes to plan something out. And you're sitting there as the DM and you're like, they don't know about this. Everything they're talking about is negated because of this. I think you have to, in those moments, you have to look at the situation, and we always say you should reward players for getting into role playing, for thinking outside of the box. And so you need to really look at the situation and say, how can is there a way I can change the story? Is there a way I can give them something for thinking outside of the box, for role playing, for doing a good job in being strategic, whatever it is there a way I can give them some help? Can this help them out in any way? I would say if there is a way, you should do it. Like, even if it's changing your story, if it's not going to change the story severely, that things are just going to become totally wrecked, I think that's okay. I think it's okay to, your players are going to have fun when their ideas are like that they spend a lot of time on, or they have this brilliant moment of like, oh, I could do this. This is so cool. And you're like, that would be cool if this wasn't the case. Well, what if that wasn't the case? Is it going to mess things up? If not, I would say just go with it. I also have had times where I've had to in the moment just go, oh, that's brilliant. However, this is the way it is.
Yeah.
And I really can't change that this is the way that it is.
Yeah.
And so there's been moments where I've had to just let players do whatever they think they're going to do, and things just work out awfully for them.
Well, that was going to be my next question to you was, so, I mean, you said when they think creatively, reward them. Could you also, they think creatively, do you just allow it to punish them? I mean, if it's like all of a sudden they think of this great thing and it puts them in more danger, for example, this with the smoke, do you let it happen? Because, I mean, they're thinking in character.
I would reiterate everything I've just said. You try, and I mean, it's about making it the most fun experience and trying to make it the most fun. Once again, bring up the horror gaming. If it's a horror game and they don't do the right thing, absolutely.
Yeah, right.
Just forget it. Like, this is it's supposed to be like that. And you'll have groups of players that will literally tell you, like, if we're not doing the right thing, give it to us. Once again, we've said this all the time, you need to know your player group, but I think that you evaluate it, and if you can change things to make your players have those awesome moments, because a lot of those awesome moments are moments that you're going to look back on and remember in that campaign.
Yeah.
And if you as a DM are just so strict in like, nope, that's not the way I had it planned, then you're going to ruin a lot of awesome moments. But there are moments that you can't be flexible. I think some DMs would disagree with me, but I think that as a DM, you're there also to tell a story, and there's going to be moments where you're like, I can't change this. And yes, there are going to be moments where some players think creatively out of the box, and unfortunately, it's not only not going to work, it's going to put them in a more dire situation. And I think sometimes that's what's going to end up happening. And I think your job as the DM is to just pat those players on the back and be like, dude, that was such a great idea, but I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
But this is the way that it was. But still make those like moments of failures fun for them.
Yeah.
Like, because failure in a D&D game, in any RPG game, I think the amount of fun that a player is going to have is not, it said there's no winning in D&D. Winning is having fun. And so failure in any kind of role-playing game doesn't mean, oh, this sucks, isn't going to be fun. Like, a lot of times crit ones can be the most fun thing if you as a DM make them funny and fun, not just like, I'm just going to screw over your character right now, but like make them like really fun and like looking back and be like, oh, remember the time that this happened? Like, it can be fun. Failure can be fun. So it's just about as a DM making them fun.
Yeah, I was gonna say, for me, going back to the punishment thing, if it's going to lead to a total party kill, probably not going to allow them to do it because it's one of those things that it's like, hey, then the campaign is over, and that just seems silly to me. But if it's something that's going to put them, they might be doing this thing, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, we want to kick down this door because we feel like kicking down this door. Well, you just, you're level 1 and you spooked 5 orcs or whatever. It's like, well, you decided to do that. I mean, you're going to go through with the punishment for that. But yeah, I think if you can, and it's not going to affect your story in large ways, go for it. Like, just allow your players to do it because it's going to be fun. They're going to remember it. But if it's going to severely alter your story, it'd be one thing. It'd be really hard for me to be like, yeah, all right, well, sure, you can do that. And now I have to come up with a whole nother campaign on the fly to try and fit what you just did.
And there might be ways in that, like you just said, like the total party kill thing. Like, if that's like something that may be a result of that, do your best as a DM to like think outside of the box yourself on ways that you can let them go ahead with that plan, but help them not to reach that we are all going to die thing. Like, I personally think sometimes it's okay as a DM to, outside of the game, talk to your players in the sense of giving them hints to, like, maybe you want to be a little bit more cautious in this scenario. Like, if it's a, like, total party kill situation, maybe you go, okay, that's a cool plan. Go for that. Do you guys want to send a scout ahead first to look and see what's going on in this dungeon or whatever it is, and like see what their response is to that?
And then you send a rogue and they crit one and all, and then they end up dying.
Like, give them a little bit of a like hint to like try and be like, maybe you should do this first, and then if you can like lead them to the information where they realize, oh man, this thing that we planned out isn't going to work. In fact, it could have led to our death. I think that's also an option there, and I think it is okay sometimes if you as the DM just go, it's up to your judgment, go, maybe this is one of those rare moments where I give them a little nudge in a direction outside of game. I think those moments sometimes are okay.
All right, next up we got one from DM Derek. Not me. Different Derek. I currently work at a game shop, and a great idea fell into our lap. Currently, our city has a growing desire to play D&D. However, there are just not enough DMs. We spoke with the College Gaming Club, and they have the ability to lend us a lecture hall weekly, 6 to 7 p.m., to host an unofficial Dungeon Master class that would be open to the college students as well as the community. We plan on having guest DMs cover different topics each week. We are now drafting the curriculum for the fall semester, and I figured I'd ask you guys for some inspiration. What order do you think would be most effective? Would running through the chapters be a good way of teaching out of the book, or possibly follow the format of your podcast? I'm assuming he's speaking about the Dungeon Master's Guide as the book. Yes, that's really cool. So yeah, I have my opinions on the Dungeon Master's Guide. I don't think I would run through it in the order it is in. I think I would start with the very most basic concepts and then work your way up from there. I think I would start with basics of setting up a town, filling it with some interesting stuff, creating some fun little adventure hooks, and like helping everyone set up their level 1 or maybe like level 1 and 2 kind of encounters, and then I would set them free from there. I feel like that's probably the best way, is to teach a DM to fish, so to speak.
And I have my opinions about higher education. No, I mean, that's as
a person with 2 master's degrees, right?
Well, I have a master's degree and I worked in higher ed for 20 years. So you always feel like you have more time. You feel like you have more time than you do. Depending on how well you can run that class, depending on how many questions are asked in that class, how much time you're actually afforded in a week. I would almost steer clear of the Dungeon Master's Guide as like your book of reference, and I would instead choose a pre-written module as the basis for your conversation, where going from front to back in the module, and you're going to touch on DM skills and DM ideas, but like saying, hey, we're all going to look at this really popular module and we're all going to talk about ways that we can run it. And you're going to have various ideas and things, but you start to show like, okay, this is something pre-written. This is the structure of something that's gone through the editing, layout, every process afforded to a company. And then it's also going to be different for probably each one of you, like what you find important and what that means what your players find important. So I think using a module as a framing device rather than the DMG, which is a very large book, is a much lower barrier of entry to start making curriculum off of. You can certainly expand it out because like the other idea could be that for half the class, that's what you do. And the second half of the class, you build your own module. Because that's the other piece. A huge piece of DMing is actually setting yourself up to have something that is personalized to the group that you might run.
Knowing how to build it and homebrew it. Yeah, I agree. I like that curriculum a lot.
Ha! I knew that all that time in school would pay off. So I went to school every day for an inordinate amount of time. I went to school for every day for 30 years.
That's too much.
Uh-huh.
Our next one comes from DM Zinthos, and it's also he's also a dragon on our forums. And he asks, and this is a really, really, I think, important question. He asks, so here is the question. When is it okay to retcon? Should you retcon? And how do you retcon? And conversely, how not to retcon? So, Chris, you threw that last one out to me. How about retconning? What do you think?
Retconning's a tough thing to think about.
Well, what is retconning, first of all, for any of our listeners who might not know?
Retcon is essentially like you go through a scenario, you do this thing, or you do a lot of things, whatever it is, and then as a DM you say, actually, we're going to go back. So you do things for 3 days, and then all of a sudden, if the DM gets themselves into a pickle or whatever, you're like, you know what? We're going to go back, and you're going to redo the whole thing again.
It's like a revision to a story, or sometimes just taking stuff out, like the expanded universe with the Star Wars lore.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, or you do something, and all of a sudden, it's like they meet this NPC, and it's like, God, I didn't want him to meet that guy yet. Just retcon everything that you knew about this character.
Or I want him to, you know what? You met him at this tavern instead of at this field, like because of this reason. Like, yeah.
Small things I think are way easier to retcon than the large things. Like, for example, you met this guy in a field, you met this guy in a tavern. Depending on what this guy told you, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. Like, you met him at this tavern instead. Not a huge deal. But if it's like, if you go through and you all of a sudden, like, go through, you kill this troll that has this huge thing of treasure in his cave. And then they get all of this treasure, and it's like, oh, sweet, we have this stuff. And they're like, actually, you know what? That's gonna screw everything over. And you're like, all right, we're gonna go back 2 days before this hunt. It's like, that's a little bit harder because characters are involved with the things that they've got. They've went through this cool adventure to get this stuff. It could potentially take the wind out of your sails for your campaign, and it might be something that ruins your campaign going forward. I think with really small things, it's really easy to retcon. I think with really big things, it's really difficult to retcon. Not impossible, just really hard because they're huge. Usually the big things are huge plot hooks and plot points that are pretty darn hard to redo. So that would be what I say. Small things, go for it, as long as it isn't game changing at all.
I agree that smaller things are easier to retcon, and bigger things are more difficult because the bigger things are going to stick out in your player's mind. But I would also say the small things, like we mentioned, like the tavern and the field. You met this NPC here. Is that pretty small to retcon? Yes. But I would also say that don't retcon that unless there is a really important reason.
Right.
Not just like, you know what, I kind of like the idea of you meeting that guy in a field rather than a tavern, or vice versa.
Yeah.
Like, why would you retcon that? Is there a reason? Like, is there something crucial that you completely forgot that this is really going to mess up your story if he met him here rather than here?
Because most times people are going to remember where they met him first anyways.
Yeah, really, yeah. It'll, and if you do this and you have to do this, there's a really good chance that when you bring it up later, some person's going to go, wait, I thought we met him in a field, not a tavern. And you have to be like, remember we retconned that. Like, we had to retcon that. Like, people will forget usually. Unless there's a real reason to retcon, I would say don't retcon. If you can think of another way to, like, switch things around, then do that. There are moments, I think, that you do have to retcon. Like, when I first started DMing, I allowed my players to play any homebrew race as long as I said, okay, that's fine. I think that's a fair race. Like, I wasn't like, oh, like you're an elf and you're a stone giant. Like, I'd be like, no, that's not happening.
Right.
But I let some players play some homebrew races that, while I've now worked through my world creation, I've gone, I don't want that race in my world. That race is just goofy. It's doesn't make sense. So I've retconned those, like little things like that really nobody's ever going to go like, oh, that race is in your world. Like, most players have already forgotten that, and it's not going to matter in the long run. Little things like that, I think, are okay to retcon. I think if something is crucial to your story and you can't if you messed up and you botched up and you like need to go back and change things, I think sometimes a retcon is just something that you have to do, but do your best to either fix it the way it is in your story. If that can't happen, then I guess retconning is all right. But little things, like you said, like are easy to do, and some things are so little that it's not, your players won't even ever notice.
Yeah,
It'll just be like, I don't remember that we even had that race in the world. Like,
Right.
So
Right.
like now,
And
it
most
doesn't
people
matter.
probably wouldn't, like, for the race example. Most people, at least the way I've never played a race twice except for a dwarf. Like, because I'm always like, I want to try
the
something
base
different,
races
right?
that if you or I said, you know what, I'm retconning that dwarves are in this world.
Right.
We've used dwarves enough that I'd be like, wait, what?
Yeah, right,
Like,
right.
That's huge.
But yeah, if it's a small thing, like it's like, hey, I was a elephant folk or something like that, and it's like, hey, sorry, but elephant folk just don't make sense here in this world anymore. Most people who played an elephant folk aren't going to go back and play it again. I was like, oh, that was really cool. I got to play it. I know what it's like. And then they'll want to try something else.
Yeah.
So things like that, probably not going to matter.
But at the same time, if you played an elephant folk race-centric campaign,
right.
and you go, you know what, elephant folk don't exist in this. Well, you better have a reason why they don't exist in the sense of you could not retcon that and have them die off from a plague or whatever if it works better that way. Or you're going to have to retcon, and then everybody's going to still remember that there's elephant folk in your world and be like, but we played an entire campaign with them.
Yeah.
So what do you say? Well, that campaign, that wasn't real. So, but I've definitely had moments where I've reached a point in my campaign, and small things I totally forgot because I've had so many layers of the campaign, and I've been like, oh, I forgot that this was supposed to happen this way. And I've just sat there and I've told my players sometimes, like,
yeah,
guys, remember that this happened this way. I'm going to retcon and just say that it happened this small, different change. And they're all cool with it. And I've had moments where a player will forget and go, but I thought this. And I've had moments where they remember the way I retconned it too. And yeah, retconning is not something you want to throw out willy-nilly and just have all the time. But
yeah, and for me too, like I've had you guys in the last campaign we did meet NPCs at different places because you went to a different place that NPC wouldn't actually be. So I kind of like retconned my own notes to make it fit like where you guys were. It didn't change the overall story. It just changed like where you guys ended up meeting something. Like the whole thing with like Caleb when he decided to teleport back all the way across the place. It was like, well, that totally throws off my plans for what I had at sea. And it was like, well, whatever. You guys can meet some of the people doing it this way. Like it's totally fine. It's not going to be totally game changing. So you can do that with yourself too, even if and that way you don't have to say, well, actually, we're going to go back and say you guys did all of this stuff and go there. Like you can just avoid all of that by changing your notes just a little bit too. So that's a good question. Thank you for that, DM Zinthos.
All right, next up we got a DM from a good friend of mine who actually just appeared on the show. But this is kind of fun to read this because I know he was a fan first. Hey, gang, this is from DM Grey Jedi. Hi, gang, I just listened to an episode of How Not to DM, and DM Neal was on with him talking to Derek, the host, about the recent summit, and Neal mentioned how he would like to know how we found your podcast. So I decided to answer the question. A little background, just so everyone's on the same page. I was running my show, How Not to DM. I got invited to the Wizards Creator Summit. Neal and I decided to talk about that after the fact, kind of break down what I saw, what I heard. And so he was just saying he heard that. And then he wanted to know how people find, the Dungeon Master's Block or whatever, right,
yeah.
Neal? So he's saying, here, I found your podcast back when it only had 10 episodes. I found it by doing a search on CastBox for Dungeon Master Podcast because I wanted to DM and was brand new to D&D. So I found you guys in my search and kept listening to this day. Love what you do. Love that you're family friendly, so I can share it with my 12-year-old nephew who's going to DM a new game for his friends and needed some help getting ideas. Have a great day, gents, and thank you for your time. You know what? Thank you, Dave, for your time, and I'm so excited that you got to be on DMnastics with Neal a few weeks ago.
I was going to say, there's literally just had you on. So perfect. And for our last one, it comes from DM Medina. So happy to discover your show. It's my second time DMing, but the first was a haphazard affair. You are not alone. I will say that. That will be my first piece of advice before reading anything else. If you have a bad session, it does not make you a bad DM. If you have a bad campaign, it does not make you a bad DM. As illustrated through the questions, figuring out what works for you and your players is the ultimate task of this process, because there may be styles that you want to run that your players do not, and the reverse may be true. And so figuring out how to make that all mesh together, give yourself some grace. That's it. Getting ready for an underwater-based homebrew. All right, calling Rich Howard. You've inspired me during my commute, long walks, and cooking. Thank you. Been having a hard time coming up with underwater monsters that aren't traditional, but I'm sure you will nice. This one got me.
That's funny.
But I'm sure you will say something soon on an episode. Perfect. I hope we did. I hope we tackled it that I haven't gotten to yet. Thank you. All right. One of the key ways to figure out or to think of non-traditional ways of adding underwater monsters is to look at their land-based counterparts. It is what we did in history. It is why the myth of the unicorn came up, because they found the narwhal. And the assumption was at the time that anything that existed on land would also exist in the sea, and the reverse then must be true.
Yeah.
So if we found a narwhal, which apparently is just a large, a seahorse, but larger with a horn, then clearly there must be a horse somewhere on land with a horn, and we just haven't found it. Take a look at a monster that you would have traditionally on land, dunk it in water, and see what you get.
I was thinking the exact same thing as when I was reading this. Like, if he hasn't hit those Rich Howard episodes yet, then he's in luck, because he's going to find some great stuff in there. And if not, hopefully you found some other places to get some good inspiration from Mammon. So, appreciate you listening, and yeah, hopefully that water campaign went as well as one could hope.
But there we go, listeners. We have answered some of your questions and hopefully given you some ideas and some inspiration, as always, as has been the case for the past 10 years. And my hope of hopes is that it'll be the case for the next 10 years as well.
As a reminder to all of you listeners, we currently have a listener survey that is active and live, and 2 lucky people who fill out that survey are going to win $25 worth of free dice from our friends at Adventure Dice. Head to our link tree, that is linktree.com/DMS_block, and click on the link to fill out the survey. Give us your feedback, what you think about the show, what you like, what you don't like, and you might win some free dice. Also, in that same link tree, we have our affiliate links near the bottom, which, if you are planning on buying anything from DriveThruRPG or DM's Guild, or you're looking for a new set of dice for yourself, you can help support the show by making that purchase and sending us a percentage of those proceeds. As always, you can leave us a review on iTunes or on Podchaser or on Good Pods, or you can follow us on Twitter at DMS_block, or like us on Facebook, or head to Discord and join in on the DMnastics so that your players don't ask, do you even lift?
And as always, we want to thank you for listening to the Dungeon Master's Block, the place where we come to talk about the Dungeon Master, the only person capable of playing gods,
killing characters,
and lowering the eagles of all of the players at the table.
See, it says it right there, Neal. It tells me to kill players every week. I guess,
it does say players. I thought it was.
No, it says killing characters.
Okay, I was like, well, you do you.
Killing players every week. There's no shortage of people out there who want to play D&D. So every week I've got a fresh batch of folks to lead out into the desert. Jeez.
We're just gonna go through the sewer system. It's gonna be great. I'm DM Neal. Good night. Good luck.
I'm DM Derek. Stay gold, pony boy.
We'll leave the lights on for you. See you, Space Cowboys.
It's not inspiration, it's not wisdom, and it's bad advice.
You should start to communicate with your players by sending them mail. You should send them letters in the mail when you have some information to give them or when you're trying to plan your next game night. I feel like that would probably be the most efficient way to go about it.
Half of my players would probably respond faster.
Got him. That was my bad advice. I don't know.
Keep on dungeon mastering. We never said it.
That's true.
Dun-dun-dun-dun-dun. Ba-da-ba-ba-dum-bum.